go. All right, we are here with Dana DiTomaso. Did I pronounce that correctly?
You did. Well done.
And we are going to talk about how awesome bounce rate is as a metric. Just kidding.
Oh, I'm gonna
So, for those people that were maybe dozing and shouldn't have been, or people like me that were busy, can you give us a quick kind of synopsis or the key takeaway point from what you just talked about?
Yeah, so one of the major points that I talked about was the idea that the way in which we've reported on really SEO success, but really any digital marketing success in the past, is flawed in the sense that we focused on how much traffic we were getting, when in reality there's lots of different ways to report on success. You just need to change your paradigm a little bit on what you're going to talk about instead of just up and to the right.
Yeah, and so you talked about goals, right? Can you kind of walk us through some of like the key goals, or even maybe someone's like, what the heck is a goal?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that we see with goals is organizations will say things like awareness or educational goals, but what does that actually mean, right? So is awareness, you know, the number of people who are Googling you, great, that's something you could report on. Or the number of unsolicited mentions of your organization on social media, that's also an awareness goal, right? Or press mentions, right? But that's how you would measure that. But you also have to define, like, what do you mean by awareness? When will you be happy with the amount of awareness that you have, right? And then when you're thinking about things like, you know, education out there, one of the things I did talk about is measuring education by determining if people are actually reading your content. Because if you just look at page views or time on page, they're both inaccurate metrics. A lot of times in analytics software. So I included a link to a recipe for Google Tag Manager where you can actually measure how long people are spending on the page and if they actually got to the bottom of the content, and then if both are true, then they actually read your content. The number of people who are actually reading content is depressingly small, but you know, it is there. Yeah.
I was at a conference around public media, and they had a session that was all like Washington Post, New York Times. They're all talking about their membership subscription models and how it's changed their content. But they said what was so great is we used to track just page views and maybe reads, but it wasn't a great indicator. And now they have these call to action, like subscribe today, become a member. And it's a way better metric in terms of what content resonates with people. So how can we add, like, should we be adding more calls to action on like certain pages around email sign up to see does this resonate, or is there a balance depending on the focus of the page? Or
I mean, pick one goal, don't have multiple CTAs, because what I see people having a mistake is like they have an email newsletter sign up and then they have a hey, come to our event, and then they have a contact us, right? It's just simmer down, just pick one of those goals, right? Don't bombard people. And then the other half of it too is you really need to respect the people who have already engaged with you. So if you're logged into the New York Times, you don't see a message to subscribe because they know you're subscribed, right? And there are ways to do this as well with your own website. So for example, a lot of software would recognize if you put a subscribed parameter at the end of your URL, for example, if they come from your newsletter, then don't show them CTAs to sign up for the newsletter that they literally just clicked on the link from the newsletter to get to your website, right? And then you can have a different CTA. What is the next logical second step for someone to take if they're an email subscriber and now you want them to do what? Give you money? Like what is the next thing that you should be doing?
Yeah, the multiple CTAs thing is interesting. It was one of the key findings in the research that we did when we tried to subclassify emails. So beyond cultivation, solicitation, what's the main purpose? And so many times our researchers were like, I don't know. They're asking me to do tons of stuff. And then I would look to try to break the ties like, I don't know how to classify this either. And so it's the same kind of principle that carries over, whether it's landing pages or emails. And why do you think that is? Why do, maybe it's not unique to nonprofits, but why do nonprofits feel the need to maybe, is it like there's a sign up for email newsletter in the footer and it just kind of gets inherited onto every page? Or are they actually just like, let's take our shot?
Well, I think a lot of people overemphasize tactics and de-emphasize strategy. And I think often tactics are a stand-in for strategy because setting goals and taking a goal and turning it into strategy and turning that into tactics, like that's hard work. And a lot of not-for-profits, they don't have time, right? They're doing a billion things. They have limited budget. You got to stay with that good score in Charity Navigator, right? So what are you going to do? And so you think, you know what, this is the tactics that we're going with, but we don't have a strategic direction. And so often it's good to just take a step back and decide what you're going to be doing for strategy.
And so do you have any tips for people that are maybe like, we're all over the place. Like, how do we streamline goal setting process? Or?
Just think about your overall business goals. Like, what are the things that matter to you? And I know this is basic goal setting 101, but make those goals smart, which I know is hard because it's stressful and people don't want to do that. But then really work on making those goals good. And there's actually a video that I have on YouTube. If you search for Dana DiTomaso, good luck spelling that, and MozCon, M-O-Z, or Z if you're American.
No, it's a Z. We're two Canadians. We can say Z.
M-O-Z-C-O-N. It was 2014, I think, was the year. And it's called Prove Your Value, and it's all about goal setting from start to finish. It does have a bit of an agency perspective, but you can 100% apply this to your not-for-profit.
Awesome.
And it's just because really, when you think about yourself as a marketing person or department within the not-for-profit, you are like their internal agency, and setting goals is a really key part of making sure that you can prove your value.
Massive.
And it's not just about getting more money as an agency, it's about like getting, value for you as an employee.
I know one of the things, I worked in software for a little bit, and we implemented like objectives and key results, or OKRs, which is like a lot of software companies apply that technique. And I found that really useful because it's like you get 3 objectives and no more than 3 key results per objective. So your whole dashboard is no more than 9 things, which is very like the process of the process of actually articulating what are the 9 things we care most about. Is actually hard to like boil it down, and just getting there is actually hugely important.
And I think a lot of people get worried thinking, well, what if there's this 10th thing that's equally important? It's like, you can only do so many things well. So focus on those 3 things to start, then move on to the next 3, then move on to the next 3, right? And just make sure you've got those 3 things nailed before you move on. It means you're focused, you're focusing on the one thing, you're spending your time more effectively, and you're not trying to do a billion things badly, you're doing a couple things really well.
And just like, will this help contribute towards one of these 3 things or 9 things? If not, don't do it.
It's like when social media first exploded and everyone's like, we have to be on all the networks. No, you don't.
And now everyone's like, no.
No, just be really good at Twitter or whatever your right social network is for you. Just don't be on everything. Same thing with digital marketing.
One of the other things I love about the OKR goal setting, I'd be interested to know your perspective, is they intentionally don't tie like bonuses to the achievement of goals. Because once you do, then people instantly like undershoot because they're like,
well, they can game them. And
exactly. So they're like, no, we're going to set like goals to shoot for, and you should only be achieving 70%. So they're saying like, if you're achieving 100%, you're not aiming high enough. And the whole idea is, if you like reach for the stars, you'll land on the moon, or the other way around. But intentionally about goal setting, because I do think inherently, Tim opened the day with like raise your hand, and we all kind of held back. I think we do that with goal setting too, right?
Oh yeah, totally. And I think there's a real pressure to, once you hit a goal, you got to set it or else, right? And maybe you don't, or maybe this is like I call them stretch goals. Like my Kickstarter, like this is where we want to get to. It would be great if we did this, and if we get here, then we'll do this. But in reality, this is where we have to get to. And it's the same thing to do with any organization. This is the amount of money we have to make each month. This is our stretch goal for the amount of money we have to make this month, right? And think about it from that sort of sales perspective as well, in terms of setting stretch goals for yourself.
And so you spend a lot of time in the SEO world. What is kind of like a trend or difference that you've seen? Because I know one of the things that people often say is like, algorithms change or techniques change. So like, what's a couple things that you've kind of seen over the last maybe couple years, 2, 3, 4 years?
I mean, what I talked about was the emergence of answer boxes or snippets, so where they're showing content from your website actually on Google and people don't click through. So it's a rise in no-click searches. It's definitely something that I think gives a lot of SEO people concern, but for me, I do see it as a branding opportunity, and I think that if you have good content, then if you get that answer box, people over time will recognize you. It might not be as good if you're in, say, sales, but talking about the not-for-profit charitable world, like absolutely, awareness and education are probably 2 of your missions, and answer boxes are a great way to get there. So don't freak out about the decline in organic traffic. If you have answer boxes, you're accomplishing your mission.
It's interesting to see kind of, and this is more of your world, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I know like on email service providers, which is more of our world, like the change in terms of penalizing poor emails and poor content, and that's kind of what we've seen in the world of like search, right?
Like you actually
can't just hack the system. Like if you've got great content that people engage with, you get rewarded. If it sucks, you get penalized.
Well, and there's too much crap out there, right? And people are smarter about separating the crap from the good stuff. So you actually put the effort in, you are rewarded. I mean, it's just, again, understanding your audience, applying the right pressure at the right time to the right people. All of that should be in alignment. And so this whole flailing around and like I spent a bunch of money and then things will happen is just not true anymore.
Is there anything specific that you've seen to nonprofits that's maybe different, or something that nonprofits do better or worse compared to, for-profit companies, or a bigger challenge for them compared to others? Or?
I think not-for-profits are definitely cautious in terms of change. They don't, because obviously limited budgets, they don't want to spend money on stuff that doesn't matter, but that also means that there's a real sort of concern in spending money on stuff that isn't actually valuable anymore, right? So, if you have been working with an SEO agency for a while and you're not quite sure what they're doing, maybe sit them down and ask, like don't feel like change is inherently bad. Just really reevaluate the amount of money you're spending on stuff, because there's new, cheaper, free alternatives that come along to a lot of tools over the years. Really reevaluate what you're spending your money on every year and make sure you're actually still spending money on the right things. Like I see a lot of not-for-profits spending money on like Outlook servers and stuff like that. And it's like, you could just go to Google Apps. It's so much cheaper and easier. Why are you still like, why do you have an in-house IT person with Outlook when you don't need that?
People, but
Sorry, IT people. Yeah, but it's true. It's just like, you shouldn't have an in-house server anymore. Like, this is 2019, the cloud. I know the cloud is just someone else's computer, but it doesn't have to be yours.
Yeah. So. Another question that we actually get, and maybe this is less than real, so forgive me if it's not, but what about like attribution of goals?
Oh yeah, I talk lots about attribution.
Yeah, because it came up in the workshop because like default's really like last click attribution, but like there's big flaws in potentially doing that. So can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I think multi-touch is, if you're not reporting a multi-touch attribution, like you're making a mistake because a lot of people, that funnel, and obviously people take all kinds of paths when you go to that funnel, right? But the tools that you use make a difference. So for example, a lot of people use HubSpot. HubSpot uses a first click attribution model. So if you have, let's say someone comes to your website via a Google ad, and then they do a search and come to your site again, and then the third time they come via email and convert, HubSpot will say it was the ad. Google Analytics will say it was the email. So who are you going to trust, right? Well, they're actually both true, but in different ways. So you can't ever get different tools to match up. You really just have to pick your one sole source of truth, make sure that's accurate, of course, and then trust that, and really look at the entire life cycle as well.
That's great. You should have been at the workshop when they asked me that question. I was like, pass.
Attribution.
Talk to someone else who knows more about it. But I mean, I think the key point, and this is what we talk a lot about, we have so much data at our disposal, and there's so much metrics and reporting that sometimes we can almost get too granular. Right. So like what we've seen is offline donors only who just get emails, give 90% more, and have a 29% higher retention rate. Now, if you only look at their transaction source, you'd say like, oh, what a waste of these emails or something like that. But if you actually take a more holistic view, and this is how we interact with like brands and products. We're not just like, I only do Google ads, I only do online, I only do like our marketing mix has been split up in ways that don't make sense to humans. Right. So multi-channel attribution or multi-touch attribution, or looking more at like multi-channel or cohort analysis. It's kind of like how we live and operate. So is it kind of a swing? Like we had no data, and then we went maybe like too far. And now we're maybe coming back to like.
And I think what people make a mistake too, thinking that you can attribute everything, but there's ad blockers, right? There's ITP, which is the intelligent tracking prevention built into Safari. There's less tracking ability now than we used to have, which means that you have to make sure your data is that much cleaner. And then you also have to understand like what percentage of people you can't track. So for example, on a lot of the websites that we do data implementations for, we have a JavaScript trick that checks whether or not they're using an ad blocker, and then reports if they were using an ad blocker, and then we can say 20% of your visitors are never going to show up in your analytics because they all use ad blockers. Sorry. And you'll see that happen when they're like, this form fill came in, but we have no idea where it came from. It's just the mystery.
Interesting.
Like, it wasn't a ghost, it was someone using ad blocker. So I think that's things to think about too, is you don't know all the different pieces that go into that session or lack thereof.
Right. Another question that we had, I'm just asking you past questions that I couldn't answer, so this is great. It was really about geo-targeting by default, right? So saying if people have a certain IP, should we show them this? Or in the context was like an email sign-up. Right, that was kind of our answer. In the context of an email sign-up, it was like asking you to choose where you're from, and someone was like, why don't you just do like IP address tracking, and then you can pre-select it for them?
Yeah, I mean, there's a line between helpful and creepy, right? So test that if you want to try that out. I mean, I think when it comes to IP stuff too, you really have to think about how much you're actually tracking from this person. And you also have to think about Google, because if that's content that you want Google to index, then you can't do IP content changes, because Google's IP is always going to be Mountain View, California. And so maybe you'll always be showing them the California content, not the New York content, right? So you really have to think about what it is that you're doing as a result of that. There are some things that we've done where we will look up like the actual lat long of where someone is. There's a public API we can hook into and grab that person's lat long and then push it into analytics along with their other stuff, but you really have to tread a fine line there, because if you do anything in Europe, GDPR, huge problem, right? Like,
you're
watch
toast.
that out. If you're here, then you can do some of that, but again, like, it also depends on that client's appetite for wanting to get into that data, and you have to make sure you're not tracking anything that's personally identifiable. No personally identifiable data in Google Analytics. You get it in there, you're in trouble, right? You really have to tread lightly when you're thinking about doing that stuff.
And the other thing that we pointed out is like, you're making a huge assumption, if maybe their IP is not even right and blah, 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 but you're making a huge assumption about the content they want to receive based on what? Where they live? Like, I live in Canada, my company's in Texas, maybe I want Texas news.
Well, and is that going to help you? Like, are you going to make a better decision, right? Or is it just data for the sake of data?
And that's got to be a huge problem. Just we can get it, let's get it.
No, because what are you going to do with it, right? Like if you don't have a plan for doing something with it, then don't ask for it.
Yeah, it's so great. Well, they're ringing the bell, I think, to call us back in. So thank you so much for being here and sharing more on this area that's like really, really important and sharing so much of your knowledge and expertise with us.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thank you. All right, so we're going to take a little break here, and then we'll be back with a few more sessions before we close out the day. As always, please feel free to ask questions here on the live chat, and we'll do our best to get them answered for you. And thank you so much, Dana.